You're watching Eye on Africa on France 24. These are the headlines. Millions of Liberians will go to the polls on Tuesday to elect a new president and parliament in the West African country's third election since the end of the civil war in 2003. The trial of those suspected of ties with Boko Haram began in Nigeria on Monday behind closed doors. It is the biggest legal investigation into the 8-year militant Islamist campaign. More than 20,000 people have been killed and 2 million forced from their homes in northeastern Nigeria during the insurgency. And in Tunisia, runners headed into the desert at dawn over the weekend for the North African country's first ever ultra marathon. The 100-kilometre ultra MIRAGE race skirted the Sahara Desert's biggest salt lake. We'll bring you footage and reactions later in the show. Hello and thanks for watching. Liberia heads to the polls on Tuesday for elections that for the first time in more than 70 years will see one democratically elected government hand power to another. This as a Nobel Prize-winning leader steps aside. President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the continent's first female president, is stepping down after serving 2 6-year terms in office. That's the constitutionally mandated limit. Our correspondent Léane de Bassompierre has more.
There's an air of excitement in the capital, Monrovia, as Liberians head to the polls to elect one of 20 presidential candidates vying for the country's top job. They include a football star, an ex-warlord, a former Coca-Cola executive and model-turned-philanthropist. Election campaigning reached fever pitch over the weekend, with supporters filling the streets adorned in their party colours. In a live television broadcast, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf called for peaceful elections. After 2 civil wars and the Ebola crisis still fresh in the memory of Liberians, safety and security remain a priority. There are 73 electoral districts with nearly 5,400 polling stations. Voting opens at 8 and draws to a close at 6.
Now, as mentioned there, one key issue the new government will have to deal with is the ongoing trauma linked to the Ebola epidemic. Those who survive the disease are the subject of rumours, ridicule, and are often looked upon fearfully by neighbours and the broader community. Our reporters spoke to survivors at the Hospital of Redemption in the capital, Monrovia, and you'll see that the shadow of the disease still very much hangs over them.
They survived Ebola but remain victims of rumours and fear in the eyes of others. Tony and Joseph still live with the spectre of the disease like a shadow that hangs over them. They help to support other survivors at the Redemption Hospital, where the first cases of Ebola appeared in Monrovia.
When I survive Ebola, when I go back to work, my colleagues stay away from me. All work together, and then we eat together, we move together, and I look at some improvement.
These men came close to death and lost many relatives. The greatest number of Ebola-linked fatalities occurred in Liberia, where more than 4,800 people perished as a result of the disease. For those who survived, many have to cope with depression, isolation, and thoughts of suicide.
There is only one psychiatrist in the entire country, which is not only dealing with everyday psychiatric problems, but a whole nation traumatized by 2 civil wars and an Ebola epidemic.
A society shaken to its very core. Liberia remains haunted by the memory of those who died. More than 700 people have been buried at the cemetery named Disco Hill, opened at the height of the Ebola outbreak. This man guards the highly contagious remains that often lie in unmarked graves. At the peak of the crisis, the bodies were burned in a crematorium, which is an additional cultural trauma for Liberians.
The bones and ashes were brought here, and we placed them in here. And that is now our culture. But if cremated, the ashes cannot represent the grave. So it's difficult.
17 months after the end of the epidemic, the consequences of this trauma remain all too present for Liberians.
Now, the first in a series of trials of those accused of being members of the militant Islamist group Boko Haram has begun in Nigeria. Some 1,600 people are to stand trial, either individually or as a group, with certain rights activists expressing concern about a lack of transparency in the procedures. Those trials are being held in secret by civilian court judges at a military facility in north-central Kainji town. Simon Harding takes a look back at the origins of the Islamist group.
It's been 8 years of extreme and unrelenting violence. Boko Haram was founded in Nigeria in 2002, but its increasing radicalization prompted an uprising in 2009. One of their first defining moves came in September 2010, when they broke out 105 members from the Bauchi prison. From that moment on, their targets evolved from traders to police stations, but also the UN headquarters in Abuja, killing 23 people in 2011. After 115 attacks that year, Nigerian President GOODLUCK Jonathan declared a state of emergency.
You are all aware of the security challenges which the activities of the Boko Haram sect have foisted on the country. What began as sectarian crisis in the northeastern parts of the country has gradually evolved into terrorist activities in different parts of the country.
Despite the Nigerian army stepping up its efforts against the jihadists, the violence continued and the group spread to Niger, Chad and northern Cameroon. In 2014, they captured more than 200 girls from a boarding school in Chibok. The kidnapping drew international condemnation, but also put moral pressure on the international community to help Nigeria. Barely a year later, Boko Haram would pledge its allegiance to the so-called Islamic State group, establishing itself as their African branch. In 2015, the Global Terrorism Index ranked it as the world's deadliest terror group. This prompted a military coalition of West African nations to start an offensive against Boko Haram, but so far it has failed to fully destroy the group.
Now, next to the eastern part of Democratic Republic of Congo, near the town of Beni, militants attacked 2 military bases there on Monday, killing 2 UN peacekeepers, this according to both the UN and the Congolese army. ADF rebels are thought to be behind the attack on the mission known as MONUSCO. It deployed attack helicopters in response to the raid, and local sources said that the army was battling militants along the main road leading from North Kivu province's Beni territory to the Ugandan border. Thomas Nicolon has more.
The attack was led by the Allied Democratic Forces, according to the UN mission in DR Congo. The Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, is a Ugandan rebel group that had been chased out of that area a few months ago by the Congolese army, backed by the UN peacekeepers. But it seems like this rebel group is returning to the area. Last Sunday, there were clashes between the ADF and the Congolese army. And last Saturday, several people were attacked in Virunga National Park by the ADF. And to this day, more than 20 people are still missing after this attack. The ADF have been operating in eastern DR Congo since the mid-1990s, and they have killed more than 700 people since October 2014.
Thomas Nicolon there. Now, Kenyan police fired tear gas and shots in the air on Monday as hundreds of demonstrators marched through the capital Nairobi to protest against proposed legal changes that would make it harder for the Supreme Court to annul a recent election. 3 people were seriously injured in the clashes, where uncertainty over the upcoming election has created turmoil. You can see those images there. There was an SUV vehicle, in fact, that drove into the crowd. For now, we don't know who was responsible for it. Kenya is due on October 26th to repeat a presidential election after an earlier vote on August 8th was annulled due to procedural irregularities. Now, last weekend, the usually peaceful Tunisian desert saw a flurry of activity. Dozens of runners headed into the desert on Saturday for Tunisia's first ever ultra marathon. That's a 100-kilometre race, and in very warm conditions indeed. The route followed the perimeter of the Sahara's biggest salt lake. The organisers hope to encourage Tunisians to take up this sport and to promote the country's southern region, where tourism continues to face a crisis. This report by Sandro Lutens and Hamdi Talili.
At 7 in the morning, the Tunisian desert is waking from its slumber. On the former Star Wars set, these people look like an ordinary group of early rising tourists. But they are actually athletes, and they're about to run Tunisia's first ultra-marathon, a 100-kilometre race.
I didn't come to win, I only want to participate. I'm going to try to go from start to finish.
I know the marathon, I know what happens up until 42 kilometers, but the rest is all new to me.
A voyage into the unknown, that is also a major challenge for the 58 runners, most of whom have no experience in running this distance. At 30 degrees under the blazing sun, it is a long and solitary race across the empty desert.
OK, you're at 35k. Next checkpoint is at 15k.
At the checkpoints, volunteers hand out water and locally produced dates for energy, under the supervision of race director AMIR GACEM.
Tunisia is a beautiful country, and I don't think that beauty is properly advertised. I don't want people to think Tunisia is all about beaches. Look around, it's wonderful here.
Through sand dunes, salt plains and oases, some runners don't miss out on taking a quick photo. After 8 hours and 48 minutes, Morocco's Mohamed El Mourabiti is first to cross the finish line. Behind the champion, others, broken with pain, have already given up. In total, 36 athletes finished the race, some arriving late into the night.
I won't lie, I thought about giving up at least 50 times. Every kilometer was testing. I'm absolutely exhausted, but I feel fantastic. I will come back if I can, because this race is just magnificent.
For this inaugural race, the Ultra Mirage has introduced Tunisians to the intensity of long-distance marathon running. The next goal is to integrate Tunisia's Ultra Mirage into the Ultra Trail World Tour by the year 2020.
Right, looks like you'd have to be ultra fit to try out one of those ultra marathons. That's all for this edition of Eye on Africa. Do stay tuned to France 24.
Because a new page of history gets written every day. Because breaking news can't wait. Information. Everywhere. In all situations. On every subject. Understanding the world. Imagining the world. France 24, a different take on the news.